So I am here joined today by Michelle Nettles, who is our CHRO or Chief People and Culture Officer. And it's a great pleasure to have you here, Michelle, today to chat about how you're doing, how you think the world is doing, and any other issues that we might be interested in. So how are you doing?
I'm doing well, quite frankly. The sun is shining here in Wisconsin, so sunshine makes a huge difference in my life. I will say that I'm fortunate that we have enough space that my husband and I are not killing each other. And this time together actually has been really good because it allows us to spend at least the evenings together. We cook most oftentimes together. And we spend that time kind of refreshing, but also digesting the full day of Zoom and Teams and Blue Jeans and you name Google, all of the online ways in which we are connecting and still socializing, but also working. So all in all, really good. Have a routine of getting up, working out, getting that shower in. Early on, I was missing showers and I'm like, how does that happen? And so you got to plan it in order for it to happen. But it's been pretty good personally.
And have you learned anything about yourself during this lockdown, which for you has lasted how many weeks now? I feel some people count, some people don't, but if you have lines somewhere in the wall and are counting the days or the weeks, how long has it been for you?
I don't have a chart up, but we send out a global leadership note every week, and this week will be the 12th. So 12 weeks. What I probably learned a bit more about myself than I thought, and I've compared myself to my husband. We've often said we're both introverts. He actually needs to be in the office a little more than I do. I'm quite comfortable working from wherever. And as long as I can connect with individuals via phone, via technology, I'm usually pleased with that. So I've enjoyed the time a bit more than I thought I would.
And so I know that you also enjoy thinking often deeply about people in general and their behavior. When you look at humanity or societies, because I know that you're also thinking about people globally in different cultures. What is your assessment so far of how we as a species, have dealt with this situation? What's the pro and the cons maybe, or, what would be your review so far?
I think the big one is solidarity, and that by and large, we've all identified a common enemy in the virus. And we're all eager to overcome that virus. I think that is what is fundamental about human beings. I think also, though, is that we are very tactile and we don't appreciate that and we take it for granted. And I think this is an awakening for all of us that the need for human connection is important. And while technology can connect us, it's still not the same. You want to touch, you want to feel, you want to get a sense of the essence of the environment. To be at a cafe in Paris or in Milan and hearing the noise and the bustle, that gives you energy, that gives you power. And we miss that. We all miss that. So those are things that I see are very, very human. The things that I see that's emerging, that's heartbreaking, is the nationalism. And when you think about where we are as a global economy, it's really important that we stay connected. You think about supply chains and the importance of them, just getting medical equipment or providing services. We must push into being a global economy and the responsibility that requires. And when you see nationalism emerge, that starts getting to a place of how are we continuing to re-marginalize individuals, countries in ways that's not beneficial in the long term for the broader global economy.
Yeah. And what about, in terms of thinking about people's resilience and adaptability? How do you think, we're doing in general as humans, given that this is such a big shock to our system?
I think we are very much proving that we can adapt and we can adapt rapidly. And that by and large, it's something that people have been wanting. I mean, when it comes to remote working, we know that through research that employees have been asking for that, workers have been asking for it. It's been the leaders, usually old folks, who less inclined to provide it, and who thought it couldn't happen. And overnight, with a flick of a switch, many companies went to working remotely, and they've seen the how their people have responded to it. So I think when you put trust in your workers, you empower them. I think they show up, and that's the beauty of human beings. If you really unleash that potential shows up most of the time.
And so if that is humans, what can we say about human resources and HR? I'm sure when you signed up for HR and this HR job, you could never expect that you'll be spending so much time focused maybe not on kind of talent, productivity, or the business side of things, but almost being a chief epidemiologist or a kind of a health advisor. How do you see the profession? I know you're very involved with associations and networks and the thought leadership in general. How has HR been dealing with this? Again, given that it's very much having to improvise often and not playing by existing playbooks or rules. But do you think the profession is coping with it well? And how do you see it kind of adapting to the situation?
Well, I don't see us getting better at the healthcare and healthcare provider. We know where to find those, and we will source for those individuals. But what I do see are the CHROs who were already very authentic and very much human focus in their approach. I see them rising to the top, and I see, when you lead from a human perspective and not just from a mechanistic approach, then you see incredible opportunity, and you see those organizations really rally behind people, and it's emerging in how they provide funds to support their people, how they get creative around their own policies, and what they offer, and how they measure what good looks like, what productivity looks like. You see a bunch of rethinking and reimagining what could happen. But that is mostly from organizations that were already doing it. And that's because the CHROs were often leading as not just a strategic partner, but really with a social justice lens or a human capability, human potential lens. And so I think what you will see with HR increasingly become really not just, the desire to be strategic partner, but really to be that strategic counselor. What's the soul? What's the culture of the organization? And that's what's emerging. I would say that was already in flight, and COVID has only accelerated it. And so for those CHROs or those HR organizations who were not in that, they will be left behind, and their employees will vote with their feet. Their workers will tell them so. And I think what you will see in this also is, leaders, how leadership is being redefined, and leaders who lead from a top down versus, empowering from the bottom up and learning through different experiences. Those leaders will fail very, very quickly. I know I was on a call yesterday, and we were literally talking about succession for the C-suite, and how are we redefining what's required, and how crisis, you really see the characteristics of a leader in a crisis. And it makes you think, do I want to follow this person? Is this person good for this company? Not just for yielding profits, but really yielding social impact. yielding a human lens to the work. So lots of things being redefined, reshaped, but all with the lens of authenticity and human capability and social justice.
And so to what degree is the role of the CHRO to work out what the formula is for a specific culture, for a specific, leadership, rather than come in as, the authority that says, look, these are the recommended guidelines. I mean, simple things, right? So now, and we were on a call together on this right now between trade-offs, right? So the economy, opening up offices versus health. Those are big decisions which presumably leaders need to consider. At what level do you come in as a CHRO and say, look, this is how much we need to tell people what to do. This is how much we need to force them to change their behavior. This is how much freedom. Do you think there is one size that fits all, or you really have to operate within the, atmosphere or culture that organization has? I'm sure you also have an opportunity to change the culture because of what's going on. So those seem like really, really interesting trade-offs and questions.
Huge trade-offs, and I will not profess that I have all the answers. First and foremost, it is truly, and COVID has proven, one size fit one. And so when you think about an employee, you think about a manager, you think about a leader, you think about a function, you think about a company, it's one size fit one. And for a company, obviously, you have to lead with your values. And what are your values to drive, what you do? That may still mean that your culture evolves. And it's one of the things that I think, here at ManpowerGroup that we need to modernize. And it's an opportunity to modernize our culture and to step back and reflect on what do we need in order to really transform our journey and achieve our strategic objectives, and how much does our culture play a role in that? The second is our leaders. Our leaders fit to lead in the new culture. And that new culture, remember, is very much the glue to get us to our strategic destination. So really, our leaders fit to lead in that. And what we're seeing and what we're hearing from employees and from leaders are, those who are not agile, you're seeing that resistance and the need to coach them. You're also seeing leaders who took, 9 months to make some decisions prior, and now they're doing it, immediately. And so you're seeing that agility emerge, but you're seeing empathy, you're seeing a demonstration of vulnerability, seeing collaboration. I mean, here at ManpowerGroup, we're seeing people work across not just functions, but countries. And that's a huge growth opportunity that we must continue to inspire. But what I would say, the other piece and the third element is always the worker. And the voice of the worker is powerful, and it is only going to get more powerful. We saw a lot of that emerging before COVID. So when you look at what was happening in France, when you look at what was happening with Google, you see those voices of the employees emerging. We and a lot of CHROs in this time, as it relates to just returning back to work, ask the employees, what are their preferences? Understand what they need. When childcare or caregiving is going to be a difficult challenge, when public transportation is going to be a difficult challenge, pushing someone back to work will only marginalize their productivity and their effectiveness. And it says to them that you don't care about me, employer. And in the current market, they probably can go find a job somewhere else. So you have to start with your values, make certain your culture is fit for purpose to drive your strategy, but for the time, make certain your leaders are capable to lead in that. And then using your employees always to get insight, to learn, to grow, to pivot, to modify. The voice of the employee is important during this time.
That's really interesting. And I was reading some reports. I don't know how trustworthy the data are, right? But Bersin or something quoted reports that employee engagement levels actually have gone up during the crisis for the people, of course, who were fortunate enough to keep their jobs and found a way to actually stay relatively productive. And that clearly suggests that some things could have changed or needed to change even without a crisis and a pandemic. If we think about, the post-lockdown office, now that so many organizations are trying to, reopen or think about what the new not normal looks like, what do you think are the things that are going to go away or change? And maybe what are the things that should go away or change? I'm thinking, will we travel as much for business? Will we have as many strict and structured shift? Will people meet in person as much? Is there going to be more flexibility? How do you think things will change, if at all they will? Because maybe this is over, and then slowly humans are also quite good at going back to their old habits. So what do you think will happen? And I know nobody knows. And what do you think should happen?
I think flexibility will be here and it will stay. How it will manifest will differ from person to person, company to company, job to job, but flexibility will be here, and it will likely increase. With that, though, that means that companies have to step back and look at investment in real estate, investment in technology, and what's the trade-offs, because you can't do all at one time. And ramping up technology to empower flexible working while ramping down real estate space, that's a hard one, and it's a cost benefit analysis that has to happen. That with that flexibility, leadership, back to redefining what leadership. So remote working and flexibility are different. Remote working just simply says you can take your laptop and you can go and work same hours somewhere else. Flexibility says it's actually the employee's choice in how they deliver their output. So that requires a leader to be very clear on what the output requirements. And some leaders are not clear on that. And so part of being in the office is butts and seats and presence rule. And the first one in, and people get points for that. I'm a lawyer by training, and early on, you had to be in the office as a young associate.
First in and last out. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And that's absolutely insane of measuring productivity. But it's so valued in our culture, regardless. I mean, from the US to Asia to Europe, you see it very pervasive in the culture. I think butts in seats, first in, last out, you will not get the same points and rewards for that going forward. So that will for sure go away. With that going away, I also think kind of formality will go away or will forever change. So, dress for your day will become increasingly.
Will people go to the office like they're dressed for Zoom at home? So like a shirt, but then underwear or shorts? We need to remind them that that's maybe crossing the line.
Crossing the line, that plus flip-flops, plus, leggings, those things are still not permitted for the workplace. But I think there's power in dressing for your day when you think about the stigmatism that a lot of people carry on. Do they look well? How well are they dressed? The amount of money women spend on kind of dressing, for business attire, how long it takes for women to get dressed. And I think these are barriers that we've long wanted to break down, that COVID-19 will help accelerate breaking down, and dress for your day will become increasingly more common. And so I'm not saying ties will go away 100%, but the use of them will decline significantly.
Yeah, and so aside from that formality or maybe informality coming in, what do you think are the new skills or competencies that managers and leaders will need to develop, not just for the future, but now, right? And you and I just finished writing an HBR piece on, for instance, finding the difficult or delicate balance between now checking in on your employees, asking them how they're feeling, empathizing with them, showing them that you care, but not caring so much that you become, a kind of somebody snoopish or creepy or intrude in their personal space. So what would be your advice right now for managers and leaders who for the first time are having to manage not just virtually and remotely, but without a physical presence existing at all?
I think there's first the need to listen and observe. So you're not in a room. So it's really important that you are hearing what your employees are saying. The word choices will make a difference. And then after that listening, how do you inquire and you ask, the right questions, and being mindful not to intrude. And when you do, because employees will let you know, and they will either let you know in their body language or they will verbalize it very quickly. But how do you apologize and be vulnerable in real time and say, hey, I overstepped, apologies. Now I'm clear. And recognize that you're learning. Your employees will give you grace and forgiveness if you demonstrate that level of vulnerability. But also recognize that you are probably going to have similar experiences. I was on a conference call and my husband came in and he didn't appreciate that I was on camera. And while he had his shorts on, he was not dressed up top at all. And then he was talking, and if I would have moved, you would have seen his shorts. And it would have not necessarily been something that he wanted to be on the camera. But in real time, as a leader, a manager, I have those same challenges. So I want to step back and put myself in the shoes of my employees as much as possible. So listening, being vulnerable, empathize, those are things that I would say managers must do. And then ask for forgiveness when it happens. Really, really important. And then the last one is exercising judgment. So yeah. Just thinking about, would you want someone asking you that question? Would you want someone invading your space that way? And just because work is now at home doesn't mean that home is open to work. And we need to be cautious of that. Managers are always viewed as evaluating, and employees are already sensitive to a manager. Now to have a manager invade their home space, managers need to be very sensitive to that and acutely aware that it will vary from employee to employee. And so one-to-one is really important. And so managers must exercise judgment and must be thinking about what it is that comes out of their mouth.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very interesting because already the boundaries between people's personal and private space were sort of, I think, more blurred than in the past, right? Than in 50 years. And now I think it's going to be even more murky or muddy. So it requires not just common sense, it seems, but that's where you need to have empathy and
yes.
See what you need to see and ignore what you need to ignore, I guess would be a safe rule of sage advice.
Exactly. I mean, I was on a call and someone asked, do you require your employees to dress formally for a Zoom call? And I kind of rolled my eyes and like, are you freaking kidding me? But then I had the conversation with my husband. And he said for certain calls, you may need it. And I said, but that gets to dress for your day. And you don't need to put a litmus test out there that, you're constantly judging employees. And especially now when employees are, acting as teachers, caregivers, doing way more laundry than they ever imagined they would be doing. All of those things while still trying to be productive. I think common sense is very much the need.
Well, and I think certainly, and I want to talk a little bit about diversity and inclusion, from a lifestyle diversity perspective, for sure, for a lot of managers, they're going to see things about their employees that they haven't considered before, right? So just looking at now you and I think both have fake office backgrounds, which is a nice way of, being somewhere else. But, clearly everything sends a signal, and I'm sure curious managers might be looking around to see, if there's anything that signals political ideology or habits, religiosity, gender orientation. Um, how do you think the field of diversity and inclusion will change, if at all, now through this kind of amplification of the digital economy, and more and more data points on people's personal life choices, preferences?
Ooh, that's a hard one because I think, sadly, I think it's going to become more fractured in multiple ways. I think let's start with the good is that for those managers who are able to demonstrate empathy, vulnerability, common sense, I think they have a real opportunity to expand their own learning, their learnability. And how do you learn what are the experiences of your employees and how do you actually build actual stronger relationships? Because you're in the homes of your employees, and if you're listening, it's a way to really build a stronger rapport and you can learn more. Simple things. So our team, the PNC team, global team, we have, 2 meetings a week. One is strictly about work, and one is we call cereal, PJs, and crying babies. And we are learning about each other. And I actually showed art. We were all supposed to talk about a country that we visit, and I, displayed art. And that, then start opening up questions. And I was comfortable with those questions and vice versa. So if you use the moment, you can increase your learnability. You can increase the rapport and relationship of the one-to-one, but also the collective as a team. But it will very quickly, in some cases, employees may not be willing to share. And so there may be a sense of shame around their economic conditions, around, their a sense of privacy around this is my home and I really don't want to share more with you. And managers have to be mindful of that and not just isolate individuals because of that. And I think for inclusion, that's going to be a hard one to break through if those individuals are not willing to share. But when you think about it at a macro level, I'm cautious of are the existing marginalized population. One of the powerful things about, the future of work is it's an opportunity to bring in talent that we've not seen before, historically disenfranchised individuals. With COVID, you see, a new group being defined, the underlying health conditions. I've heard terms like weak, I've heard terms like fragile, and, having laypersons define what's underlying health conditions. So, obesity, do you know what that really is? And just because someone is heavier than you are, does that mean that they have an underlying health condition? Are they not fit to work? Are they likely to be a carrier of the virus? So you're elderly. Already was a protected group in the US, but even more now, you're cautious around their ability to actively engage in the work environment. And then, I heard the term sick shaming. And, I'm someone who suffers from seasonal allergy. So you're likely to see me sneeze or cough, at least once a day. And you think about the fear now that causes and on other employees. So then do I have my own kind of caution and bias around myself and others that emerge? So I think your diversity and inclusion will be more fragmented because you're now adding more elements to an already challenging place. And so intersectionality becomes even more difficult to unpack and to understand unless you actually experience it. So it goes back to leaders must, be prepared to listen, must be empathetic, must exercise common sense, must also be vulnerable to share. Because in the absence of that, you will not necessarily understand, but you will, easily, we as human beings, we put people in categories in order to just be able to function and to deal with them.
And another category, maybe the new one that emerged with this crisis, is that of the essential worker, right? So imagine a lot of people who might have liked their careers, seen themselves as quite valuable contributors to the economy or system, suddenly are told you're not essential. And, this is probably one of the new categories that emerged from the recent crisis.
Yeah, but it's interesting because even those essential workers, they're oftentimes lower paid, lower skill, and they're more at risk. And so even though we see them as essential, I mean, these essential workers have been with us forever, but every day we pass them. We didn't
suddenly
appreciate them
now
the same way.
time bound, they are essential. It's like saying, okay, we're elevating your status for now, but then you go back to your old status.
Exactly. And it's one of the things that I would be mindful of back to automation. What are those things that we move into touchless and as a society we get more comfortable with? And so those essential jobs that we see today, how quickly will some of them become automated? And that the new social norm and social contract is that you don't have a server pouring water for you. You go to a machine and you grab it. How do you think about that differently and the impact to those essential workers?
And how about the field of D&I or IND or I, let's say diversity and inclusion or whatever acronym you prefer? What is your view of it in general? Are we making progress? It seems, at least to me, from a distance, that it started as a very much like a box ticking exercise, and companies were afraid to be sued and wanted to have people from different demographics in their websites so that they seemed that was the beginning. Have we evolved much from that state to a point where people see that more inclusive cultures are truly advantageous for the business and that there is no alternative but to manage people who are differently? Where do you see it?
So I think we've regressed in totality, and this is coming with more of a U.S. lens than a global lens. But even when I think globally, when you think of religion, when you think of country, back to nationalism, you see regression happening. There was a McKinsey study some time ago around the difficulty of optimizing diversity and inclusion across all groups, so gender and race in particular. And most companies struggle with doing multiple groups at one. And so gender became the easiest one for obvious reasons. We all have a mother, we may have a sister, we may have a spouse, we have a friend. So gender became the easiest one because it's a point of connection that we all have. From a racial standpoint, it's still very hard. And back to, those essential workers, you disproportionately see, in the States, a large group of those individuals being people of color. Or you see them being migrant workers. And those are areas where you wrestle with, will they be re-marginalized and exposed to health risk, but not necessarily, the income to advance them so they will not have to risk their lives every day to go to work and risk their family lives in that. And so I think back to diversity and inclusion becoming more fragmented, that's an example of how it will continue to hit some of the most vulnerable individuals in the U.S., but you see that manifesting globally. So I don't think the practice of D&I has really progressed. It shifts based off of what's current. And it shifts based off of what group is the most needed or the easiest to attract. Before COVID, you saw the increase in disability and the need, because you're looking at kind of neural disabilities and the benefits of that. And when you see autism and autistic individuals, their ability in the new AI environment, well, that becomes very much more popular. So you see this emerging from people of color to gender to disability, and more globally, religion. Yeah. And so it's a hard one. It's a hard one to get our arms around. And I think it will always be a hard one because, again, as human beings, we're tribal by nature.
And can leaders or even managers drive change if they're part of a culture, organizational culture that doesn't care that much about that? Can organizations drive change if they're part of a society or a system where, biases and prejudice are inherent? I mean, how much can we expect businesses to realistically drive these change and progress forward?
I think you will still see it. I think you see, investors very clear. So BlackRock is very, very prominent and clear around the importance. So on the ESG front, there's still going to be this mandate for it, without a doubt. And when you think about, the resiliency of supply chain in a global supply chain, that requires you to look across different cultures, look across different countries, have skills to adapt, to communicate, to engage. So diversity and inclusion, I think, is actually going to be more important to the global economy. How it actually manifests is still very much difficult, and it will be company to company, manager to employee, employee to employee. It's still going to be on a one-to-one basis, but all the more important in a global economy. But companies will still struggle with it and wrestle with it very, 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 very much.
And it seems that at least from a demographic standpoint, at least in places like the US, diversity is almost a given. Maybe not for all categories and all the kind of groups in all industries and places, but you have workforces becoming more diverse. So is that why there is so much focus on creating an inclusive culture where you don't just bring people who are different or look different, but actually they feel valued and they can, be appreciated and treated in a fair way?
Well, I think so much of diversity and inclusion is also that consumers are diverse. And so at the end of the day, even if you're a B2B company, you're generally providing services in some form or fashion that impacts a consumer. And so B2C companies get this. I will not say they're all great at it, but they fundamentally get it. And so consumers are increasingly more diverse and increasingly comfortable showing their diversity. And when you date back to the 1970s or the 80s, and definitely in the 60s, there was much more around assimilating versus embracing your differences. And so consumers are demanding. And when you have consumer choice, that means companies, organizations must modify and must adapt. If they don't, they will be left behind. And we saw that post-COVID, and you'll continue to see that We saw that pre-COVID, and you'll continue to see that post-COVID.
So Michelle, I was making a little list of all the things I wanted to talk about, but we didn't have time. And that includes teams, talent, digital transformation, which we have a meeting on in a couple of hours or so, innovation, ditto. So I think we need to do a second part of this, to be continued. And I wanted to thank you for your insights, your thoughts. Now I can go back to wearing my suit and tie so that I'm ready for the next meeting.
I have a t-shirt on. I have t-shirt, jeans, and flip-flops, but you can't wear flip-flops in the office.
It's true. It's true. Anyway, thank you so much. I'm sure people both internally and externally will appreciate hearing your views and seeing how you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and let's see if we can now, there should be a stop record. Okay, good. How did you feel? How did you think?
Still says you're recording.
Yeah.